She is Hillary Clinton. She's a legend. She's going to be in the history books. She's a former nominee of our party, and she just came out against a sitting U.S. Congresswoman, a decorated war veteran, and somebody who's running for the nomination of our party with just a complete smear and no facts.
She called her a Russian asset as a fact, and as you point out, sitting U.S. Congresswoman.
A sitting U.S. Congresswoman. Now, this is a very, very dangerous game, and there's a backstory here. And there's two sides to every story. Let's not forget, Tulsi Gabbard was picked out by the Democratic Party establishment and put at the top of the DNC. They thought she was going to be their golden girl. And she got in that position, the DNC, and she looked around. She saw Debbie Wasserman Schultz and other people, Clinton allies, doing stuff they shouldn't have been doing in the primary. And Tulsi publicly quit and then endorsed Bernie Sanders. And it's been payback hell ever.
Like so many of you, it is painful and disheartening to see how much divisiveness is being fomented by those who wish to tear us apart. We have people in positions of power who are not thinking about the well-being of the people and our planet. Where is that conversation about the needs of our people? Where is the conversation about peace? Every time we launch these interventionist regime change wars, it is not only our veterans who pay the price for that. Every single one of us pays the price. We have spent trillions of your taxpayer dollars to pay for these wars, taking those dollars away from our communities and our people who need them right here at home. There is no force more powerful than love. This is how we come together as Americans for the country that we love.
What exactly is the military-industrial complex? Well, the term is most attributed to President Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was one of the highest-ranked generals in U.S. history and served during World War II. As he left office in 1961, he advised that military power was necessary to maintain peace. However, he warned against the military-industrial complex, or the self-perpetuating relationship between the economy, the military, and the government. In his farewell address, Eisenhower said, "We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought by the military-industrial complex."
Put my tinfoil hat on when I talk about these interventionist foreign policy wars and regime change wars. The tinfoil hat thinks military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
People being asked or forced into making decisions that benefit these giant corporations that make weapons and profit off of war.
Yeah.
This is the worst case scenario in terms of conspiracy theories. The idea that someone wants war so that they can make money and they don't care if people die.
Well, you can take your tinfoil hat off because the military-industrial complex is a real thing.
Do you think that someone's doing this on purpose, or do you think this is team mentality in action, where people are supporting a particular candidate and they look at you as being competition of that candidate? Like, what do you think?
I think it's probably a combination. I'm challenging the establishment, challenging the status quo, challenging the foreign policy establishment, and challenging the political establishment in calling things as I see them, calling it straight, and speaking the truth, whether that be calling out leaders within my own party or leaders of the other political party. And, I think that strikes fear in a lot of people who are uncomfortable with it at a minimum.
It was just over 90 minutes beyond President Bush's deadline for Saddam Hussein to leave Iraq that U.S. warships and planes, there were F-117 stealth bombers involved, launched the opening salvo of Operation Iraqi Freedom. The attack came in waves, cruise missiles followed by the F-117 stealth bombers with so-called bunker-busting bombs. Their target, a bunker believed to be sheltering what are called top leaders of the Iraqi regime.
As Director Tenet has pointed out, Secretary Powell presented evidence last week that Baghdad has failed to disarm its weapons of mass destruction, willfully attempting to evade and deceive the international community. Our particular concern is that Saddam Hussein may supply terrorists with biological, chemical, or radiological material.
Open your eyes. Open your eyes.
Right after 9/11, people were asked about Iraq, and only about 16% felt Saddam Hussein had anything to do with it. But with all of this propaganda coming out, Cheney and all those folks, about 28% believed that Iraq had something to do with it. 2 years after we invaded Iraq, close to 60%, 56% of Americans believed a delusion.
What did Iraq have to do with what?
The attack on the World Trade Center.
Nothing.
Wait, in a press conference right after September 11th, President Bush was asked, what did Iraq have to do with September 11th? And he said nothing. President Bush must watch Alex Jones, I guess, because 2 years later, after all the run-up to the war in Iraq, the media and the propaganda machine had convinced 56% of the American people that Iraq had something to do with September 11th. Is this proof that propaganda works and the CIA can control some elements of our media? I would suggest this is pretty good evidence that might be the case.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks? This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
It was a war fought to uncover weapons of mass destruction.
I knew, and I'd been told by President Saddam Hussein himself, that Iraq did not have any weapons of mass destruction.
Baghdad has failed to disarm its weapons of mass destruction.
Liar. A war in which the British and Americans had expected to be welcomed as liberators.
There was a belief that they would capitulate as we got closer, and that there would not be much of a fight.
Helicopter to land now.
A war in which the Iraqi army was supposed to switch sides and help run Iraq.
There was nobody to receive the surrender from. We couldn't find them. They weren't there.
A war fought in the name of peace.
The tinfoil hat thinks military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
People being asked or forced into making decisions that benefit these giant corporations that make weapons and profit off of war.
Well, the potshots continue between former Vice President Dick Cheney and Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky as they take aim at one another in the debate over America's intervention of Iraq. Just last month, Cheney, speaking at a gathering of Republican fundraisers, he said, "One of the things that concerns me first about the campaign is what I sense to be an increasing strain of isolationism, if I can put it in those terms, in our own party." He didn't need to name any names. One of those isolationists, as he calls them, is Rand Paul. And he's got a blistering review of Cheney's foreign policy.
Footage of Rand Paul from 2009. It's pretty exciting. So here's Rand Paul in 2009 speaking to Republican students at Western Kentucky University. And he's talking about Dick Cheney and the war in Iraq. And listen to his theory.
There's a great YouTube of Dick Cheney in 1995 defending Bush #1. And he goes on for about 5 minutes. He's being interviewed, I think, by the American Enterprise Institute. And he says it would be a disaster. It would be vastly expensive. It would be a civil war. We'd have no exit strategy. He goes on and on for 5 minutes. Dick Cheney said it would be a bad idea, and that's why the first Bush didn't go into Baghdad.
Do you think that the U.S. or UN forces should have moved into Baghdad?
No.
Why not?
Because if we'd gone to Baghdad, we would have been all alone. There wouldn't have been anybody else with us. It would have been a U.S. occupation of Iraq. None of the Arab forces that were willing to fight with us in Kuwait were willing to invade Iraq. Once you got to Iraq and took it over and took down Saddam Hussein's government, then what are you going to put in its place? That's a very volatile part of the world, and if you take down the central government in Iraq, you can easily end up seeing pieces of Iraq fly off. Part of it the Syrians would like to have to the west. Part of eastern Iraq, the Iranians would like to claim, fought over for 8 years. In the north, you've got the Kurds, and if the Kurds spin loose and join with the Kurds in Turkey, then you threaten the territorial integrity of Turkey. It's a quagmire if you go that far and try to take over Iraq.
Dick Cheney then goes to work for Halliburton, makes hundreds of millions of dollars as their CEO. Next thing you know, he's back in government. It's a good idea to go into Iraq. The day after 9/11, George Tenet's going in the House and Richard Pearl's coming out of the White House. And George Tenet should know more about intelligence than anybody in the world. And the first thing Richard Pearl says to him on the way out is, we've got it, now we can go into Iraq. And George Tenet, who supposedly knows as much intelligence as anybody in the White House, says, well, don't we need to know that they have some connection to 9/11? He says it doesn't matter. It became an excuse. 9/11 became an excuse for a war that they already wanted in Iraq.
I'm Ray McGovern, a 27-year veteran of the Central Intelligence Agency. Why did you lie to get us into a war that was not necessary and that has caused these kinds of casualties?
Ruh-roh. First of all, I haven't lied.
Oh, he didn't lie. All right, well, that settles it, everybody. There's pound cake in the back. We can all have a nice time, and,
It appears that there were not weapons of mass destruction there.
You said you knew where they were.
I did not.
See? He never said he knew where they were.
We know where they are. They're in the area around Tikrit and Baghdad and east, west, south, and north somewhat.
So the Secretary of Defense caught in a contradiction about weapons of mass destruction. Surely that will be a big story.
How much of an axe do you have to grind with Secretary Rumsfeld?
But he wasn't just any heckler. Were you nervous?
Tucker, I resent the word heckler. I'd like you to take that back.
Okay, I'm not taking it back.
Donald Rumsfeld encouraged whoever, I think, had their hands on you at the time to let you stay there. Does he get any credit for that today?
Isn't it enough that he was wrong and had bad judgment? Why does he have to be a liar, too?
Well, you know, that's the question you have to direct to him.
But won't.